H1. The Galactic Council begged for peace, but it was too late. H2. Part 2. The Sleeping Giant Awakens. H2. Far from Earth, in a space station older than human civilization, the Galactic Council watched events unfold with mild interest. The council was made up of 12 ancient species who had ruled the galaxy for millions of years. They had seen countless younger races rise and fall. They expected humanity to be no different. Councillor Thren of the LateHFY was the oldest member of the council. His species had been traveling between stars when humans were still living in caves. He had blue skin that seemed to glow softly and eyes that held the wisdom of ages. But even with all his wisdom, he could not see what was coming. The council discussed humanity briefly during one of their meetings. Most of them agreed that the humans would surrender. Every species the LateHFY had conquered eventually submitted. It was simply the way of things. The strong ruled and the weak obeyed. Councillor Thren suggested sending an ambassador to Earth, not to help the humans, but to encourage them to accept their fate peacefully. A quick surrender would mean less suffering for everyone. The council agreed and chose Ambassador Vela for the task. Vela was a member of the Silurian species. They were known as the best diplomats in the galaxy. She had convinced dozens of species to surrender to more powerful enemies. She expected this mission to be easy. When her ship entered Earth's solar system, she was surprised by what she saw. Ships were being built in orbit around the planet. Not small ships, but warships, dozens of them, with more being constructed every day. The humans were not preparing to surrender. They were preparing for war. She landed on Earth and was greeted by General Nathan Cole, the head of all Terran military operations. He was a serious man, with a scarred face and cold eyes. Beside him stood Secretary of Defense Laura Patterson, a woman known for her sharp mind and even sharper tongue. Ambassador Vela delivered her message carefully. She explained that the LateHFY were powerful beyond anything humanity could imagine. She said that their fleet numbered over 10,000 warships. She told them that every species who had resisted the LateHFY had been destroyed completely. She advised them to surrender. She said it was not shameful to accept defeat against a superior enemy. She promised that life under LateHFY rule was not so bad. Humans would simply need to learn their place in the galactic order. General Cole listened without expression. When Vela finished speaking, he was quiet for a long moment. Then he began to talk. He told her about human history. He told her about the ice ages that nearly killed their species. He told her about the plagues that wiped out millions. He told her about the world wars, where humans killed each other by the tens of millions. He told her about every disaster and catastrophe that humanity had faced and survived. He said that humans did not know how to surrender. It was not in their nature. When they faced impossible odds, they did not give up. They adapted. They endured. They found a way to win. Secretary Patterson added something that made Vela's blood run cold. She said that the LateHFY had made a mistake by giving humanity a year to prepare. Humans were at their most dangerous when they had nothing to lose and time to plan. Every day that passed, Earth grew stronger. Every day more ships were built, more weapons were designed, more soldiers were trained. Vela returned to the Galactic Council with a heavy heart. She stood before the 12 ancient species and delivered her report. She told them that humanity was not going to surrender. She told them that the humans were building a fleet at an impossible speed. She told them that she had looked into General Cole's eyes and seen something that frightened her. She had seen absolute certainty that humanity would win. The council members laughed at her warning. Councillor Thren asked how many ships the humans had. Vela said perhaps a few hundred by the end of the year. The LateHFY had over 10,000. The math was simple. Humanity would be crushed. But Vela could not shake her fear. She had visited many species facing destruction. All of them had shown fear, despair, or hopeless acceptance. The humans had shown none of these things. Instead, they had shown anger and determination. They had shown a hunger for revenge that burned like fire. On the LateHFY prison station, far from Earth, Captain Daniel Harper and his surviving crew were kept in small cells. They were beaten regularly and given barely enough food to survive. The LateHFY wanted to break them, to turn them into examples of what happened to those who resisted. But the LateHFY did not understand humans. Pain did not break them. It made them stronger. Hunger did not weaken their spirit. It sharpened their focus. Captain Harper began talking to the other prisoners, not just the humans, but members of other species who had been enslaved by the LateHFY. He learned that there were dozens of conquered races on the station, all of them living in chains. Some had been slaves for centuries. They had forgotten what freedom felt like. Harper reminded them. He told them about Earth, about humanity, about the fleet being built to challenge the LateHFY. He told them that help was coming. He asked them to be ready when it arrived. Lisa Morgan used her skills to map the station secretly. She memorized guard rotations and security systems. Kevin Drake studied the LateHFY technology and found weaknesses that could be exploited. Amy Lawson spread hope among the prisoners, telling them stories of human courage and resilience. The seeds of rebellion were being planted. On Earth, the transformation continued at a pace that should have been impossible. Factories worked around the clock. Scientists made breakthrough after breakthrough. The crashed remains of LateHFY probe drones were studied and reverse-engineered. Human weapons began to incorporate alien technology, becoming deadlier than anything built before. Dr. Katie Marshall led a secret project called Prometheus. Her team was developing something that would change the nature of warfare forever. She worked without sleep for days at a time, driven by the memory of the crew members who had died on the Starbound Hope. The months passed quickly. The deadline given by the LateHFY grew closer. High Commander Zython waited with smug confidence for humanity's surrender. He had already planned a grand ceremony where the human leaders would kneel before him and beg for mercy. He would never get that ceremony. Instead, he would get something he never expected. War was coming, and humanity was ready. The Galactic Council begged for peace, but it was too late. Part 3. The Year of Fire. 9 months had passed since the LateHFY gave humanity their ultimatum. High Commander Zython was growing impatient. He decided to send raiding parties to the edge of human space. His goal was simple. He wanted to remind the humans of their place. He wanted to kill a few thousand of them and destroy their pathetic little ships. He expected easy victories. He was wrong. Commander Ben Taylor was 32 years old. Before the attack on the Starbound Hope, he had been a cargo pilot, flying supplies between Earth and Mars. Now he commanded the Terran First Fleet, a group of 100 warships built in record time by human hands. When the LateHFY raiding force of 200 ships entered human space, Taylor was waiting for them. His fleet was smaller, but his ships were different from anything the LateHFY had seen before. They were faster, more nimble, and armed with weapons specifically designed to crack LateHFY shields. The battle lasted 6 hours. The LateHFY commander expected the humans to fight in straight lines, exchanging fire until one side was destroyed. That was how all species fought. That was the civilized way of war. Humans did not fight that way. Taylor split his fleet into small groups that attacked from every direction at once. When the LateHFY turned to face one threat, another group would strike from behind. Human ships moved in patterns that seemed random, but were carefully planned. They used asteroids for cover. They played dead, and then attacked when the enemy came close. The LateHFY shields were strong, but they had a weakness. They could not handle rapid changes in energy frequency. Human weapons alternated between different types of energy, faster than the shields could adjust. One by one, LateHFY ships began to explode. When the battle ended, 160 LateHFY ships had been destroyed. Taylor had lost only 18 of his own. The remaining LateHFY fled back to their territory with fear in their hearts. High Commander Zython received the news in silence. His officers waited for him to speak, but he said nothing for a long time. Finally, he gave new orders. He would send a real fleet this time. 2,000 ships, enough to wipe out every human vessel in existence. On Earth, news of the victory spread quickly. People celebrated in the streets. For the first time since the attack on the Starbound HFY, there was hope. Humanity could fight. Humanity could win. But Admiral Chris Bennett did not celebrate. He knew that the real battle was still coming. He ordered every shipyard to increase production. He called for more volunteers. He pushed the scientists to work even harder. Katie Marshall finally completed Project Prometheus. She stood before the military leaders and explained what she had created. It was an antimatter weapon, more powerful than anything in human history. A single warhead could destroy a ship the size of a small moon. The weapon was unstable, dangerous, and almost impossible to defend against. Some of the officers were afraid of what she had built. One general asked if such a weapon was ethical. Dr. Marshall looked at him with tired eyes. She asked if it was ethical to enslave entire species. She asked if it was ethical to beat prisoners for entertainment. She asked if it was ethical to threaten to kill billions of innocent people. The general had no answer. The Terran Defense Fleet now numbered over 3,000 ships. They were crewed by men and women who had volunteered from every nation on Earth. Rich and poor, young and old, all standing together against the darkness. They knew they might die. They did not care. They were fighting for their home, their families, and their future. Zython's invasion force of 2,000 ships arrived at the edge of human space 3 weeks later. It was the largest fleet the LateHFY had assembled in centuries. Each ship was crewed by experienced warriors who had conquered dozens of worlds. They expected to crush the human resistance in a matter of days. Admiral Bennett met them at Proxima Centauri, the closest star system to Earth. He had chosen this location carefully. The system was filled with asteroid fields and unstable space that would make the LateHFY's superior numbers less effective. The Battle of Proxima Centauri began at dawn on a Tuesday, Earth time. 3,000 human ships faced 2,000 LateHFY warships. The space between them filled with weapons fire so intense that it looked like a new sun had been born. The fighting was brutal. Human ships were torn apart by LateHFY weapons. LateHFY ships exploded under the assault of Prometheus warheads. Crews died by the thousands on both sides. The vacuum of space filled with debris and bodies. Commander Taylor led the most dangerous attacks, diving his small fleet into the heart of the enemy formation. Lisa Morgan's brother, Commander Jake Morgan, sacrificed his ship to destroy a LateHFY command vessel. Dr. Marshall watched from Earth as the weapons she had created turned the stars red with fire. The battle lasted 3 days. On the first day, it seemed like the LateHFY would win. Their numbers were overwhelming, and their ships were strong. But humans did not give up. They fought through exhaustion and fear. They fought even when their ships were burning around them. On the second day, the tide began to turn. LateHFY commanders made mistakes because they could not understand human tactics. Human captains took risks that no sane species would attempt. Ships that should have retreated instead charged forward and took enemies with them into death. On the third day, the LateHFY fleet broke. Over 1,500 of their ships had been destroyed. The survivors ran back to their territory in complete disorder. High Commander Zython watched the reports in disbelief. This was not possible. Primitive humans could not defeat the mighty LateHFY. But they had. Across the galaxy, whispers spread among the enslaved species. The Veltari had been beaten. A young species from a small planet had done what no one else could do. They had made the masters bleed. On the prison station, Captain Harper heard the news from a friendly guard who had begun to believe in the human cause. He smiled for the first time in months. He knew that this was only the beginning. The Galactic Council called an emergency meeting. Counselor Thren stood before his colleagues with a pale face. He admitted that they had underestimated humanity. The question now was what to do about it. The answer would take time to find, time that humanity would not waste. The Galactic Council begged for peace, but it was too late. Part 4. The Tide Turns. The victory at Proxima Centauri changed everything. Humanity was no longer just defending their home. Now they were ready to take the fight to the enemy. Admiral Sam Griffin was given command of the Terran Expeditionary Force. He was an older man who had spent his whole career preparing for a war he never thought would come. Now that war was here, and he intended to win it. His mission was not just to defeat the Velthari. It was to free every species they had enslaved. For too long, the galaxy had lived under the shadow of Velthari rule. Humanity would be the light that ended that darkness. The first target was a planet called Korath Prime. It was a mining world where millions of aliens from 6 different species worked as slaves. They dug precious metals from the ground with their bare hands, while Velthari guards beat them for working too slowly. Many of them had been born into slavery. They had never known freedom. Admiral Griffin's fleet arrived without warning. The Velthari Defense Force was small because they never expected anyone to attack their territory. The battle lasted only 2 hours. When it was over, human soldiers landed on the planet's surface. The slaves watched in confusion as strange creatures in armor walked toward them. They had never seen humans before. They did not know what to expect. Some of them ran away in fear. Others fell to their knees, thinking these were new masters come to replace the old ones. A young sergeant named Tony Russo approached a group of frightened workers. He took off his helmet so they could see his face. He told them that they were free. He said that no one would ever hurt them again. He said that humanity had come to help them. The workers did not believe him at first. Freedom was a word they had heard in old stories, not something that happened in real life. But then the human soldiers began breaking their chains. They gave them food and medicine. They treated their wounds with gentle hands. One old alien, a member of a species called the Vraxi, began to cry. He told Sergeant Russo that he had been a slave for 80 years. He said he had given up hope long ago. He asked why the humans were doing this. What did they want in return? Russo smiled sadly. He said they wanted nothing. He said that no one should live in chains. He said that humanity knew what it was like to be oppressed, and they would not stand by while others suffered. News of the liberation spread quickly. Other enslaved species heard that strangers from a distant world were fighting to free them. Hope began to burn in hearts that had been cold for centuries. Admiral Griffin continued his campaign. Planet after planet was freed. The Velthari tried to stop him, but their forces were scattered and confused after the defeat at Proxima Centauri. Each victory brought more allies to humanity's side. Former slaves volunteered to fight alongside their liberators. On the prison station, Captain Daniel Harper knew that his moment had come. For months, he had been building a network of resistance among the prisoners. Humans, Vraxi, Silurians, and dozens of other species had all agreed to rise up when the time was right. That time was now. Amy Lawson had managed to steal a communication device from a careless guard. She sent a signal to a human ship patrolling nearby. Kevin Drake had figured out how to disable the station's security systems for exactly 3 minutes. Lisa Morgan had trained a small army of prisoners in hand-to-hand combat. The uprising began at midnight, station time. Prisoners broke free from their cells and attacked the guards with makeshift weapons. The fighting was brutal and bloody. Many prisoners died in the first few minutes. But they had spent too long in chains to stop now. Captain Harper led the assault on the command center. He fought through corridors filled with smoke and screaming. He killed 4 Velthari soldiers with his bare hands. When he reached the control room, he found the station commander trying to send a distress signal. Harper stopped him. He looked the Velthari in the eyes and saw fear there. It was the same fear the humans had felt when the Starward Hope was attacked. It felt good to see that fear reflected back. The prisoners took control of the station. Harper broadcast a message to the entire galaxy. He showed his face, bloodied but proud. He said that the Velthari were not invincible. He said that any species that wanted freedom could fight for it. He said that humanity stood with all who refused to kneel. High Commander Zython watched the broadcast in his command center. His scales had turned pale with rage. This was not supposed to happen. The humans were supposed to be weak. They were supposed to surrender. Instead, they were tearing his empire apart. He sent a message to the Galactic Council, demanding that they intervene. He invoked ancient treaties that required the Council to maintain the balance of power in the galaxy. He threatened them with war if they did not help stop the human advance. The Council met to discuss his demands. Councillor Thren listened to the debate with a heavy heart. For millions of years, the Council had maintained peace by never challenging the Velthari. They had watched species be conquered and enslaved. They had done nothing, because doing nothing was easier than taking risks. But now Thren stood and spoke. He talked about the shame he felt when he watched the Velthari beat Captain Harper on that first broadcast. He talked about the reports of liberation that came from freed worlds. He talked about the courage of a species that had been traveling among the stars for less than a decade, but had already accomplished more than the Council had in millennia. He proposed an alliance with humanity. The vote was close. 6 species voted yes, 5 voted no, 1 abstained. The motion failed by a single vote. The Council would remain neutral. But Thren knew that neutrality was no longer an option. The galaxy was changing. Humanity was changing it. Those who did not adapt would be left behind. Meanwhile, High Commander Zython gathered every ship the Velthari still had. Over 8,000 warships assembled at the edge of human space. This would be the final battle. This time, there would be no retreat. He would go to Earth itself and burn it to ash. He would make the humans pay for every insult, every defeat, every moment of shame they had caused him. The storm was coming, and Earth was directly in its path. The Galactic Council begged for peace, but it was too late. Part 5. Too late for peace. 8,000 Velthari warships moved toward Earth like a dark cloud blocking out the stars. It was the largest fleet ever assembled in galactic history. High Commander Zython stood on the bridge of his flagship, a massive vessel called the Eternal Dominion. He had one goal in his mind. He would destroy humanity completely. The Galactic Council watched the fleet move with growing fear. They understood now that they had made a terrible mistake. If humanity was destroyed, the Velthari would be stronger than ever. They would punish any species that had shown sympathy to the humans. The balance of power in the galaxy would shift forever. Councillor Thren sent an urgent message to both sides. He begged for peace. He offered to host negotiations. He promised that the Council would provide whatever was needed to end the war. He said that enough blood had been spilled. The message reached Admiral Sam Griffin aboard his flagship, a vessel called the Defiance. He sat in his command chair and read the words carefully. Beside him stood Commander Lisa Morgan, who had escaped the prison station and now served as his tactical officer. Captain Daniel Harper was there too, having been reunited with the fleet after the uprising. Griffin read the message aloud. The bridge crew listened in silence. When he finished, no one spoke for a long moment. Then Captain Harper stepped forward. His voice was calm, but filled with cold fire. He reminded them of what happened when humanity first reached out to the stars. They had sent explorers, not warriors. They had offered friendship, not threats. And the Velthari had answered with violence and chains. He said that humanity had begged for peace once before. They had asked for understanding. They had hoped for cooperation. The response had been the destruction of the Starward Hope and the enslavement of its crew. Admiral Griffin nodded slowly. He recorded his response to the council. He told them that humanity had wanted peace. They had always wanted peace. But peace was not something you could have alone. It required both sides to choose it. He said that the Velthari had chosen war. They had chosen cruelty. They had chosen to treat humanity as insects to be crushed. Now they would face the consequences of that choice. He told the council that the time for peace had been before the first shot was fired. Now it was too late. The human fleet assembled in the Sol system, around the planet that had given birth to their species. 4,000 Terran warships formed the main defense line. 2,000 more ships had come from the freed worlds, crewed by Vraxi, Korath, and a dozen other species who had chosen to stand with their liberators. 6,000 ships against 8,000. The odds were still against humanity, but they had faced worse odds before. The Battle of Sol began when the Velthari fleet entered the system. High Commander Zython ordered a direct assault, confident that his superior numbers would crush the defenders. He was about to learn a hard lesson about human determination. The fighting was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. Ships clashed at close range, their weapons turning space into a sea of fire. Explosions lit up the darkness like fireworks. The screams of dying crews echoed across thousands of communication channels. Admiral Griffin directed the battle with cold precision. He used every asteroid, every moon, every piece of debris as a weapon or shield. His commanders knew exactly what to do, because they had trained for this moment their entire lives. The Velthari pushed forward through heavy losses. They reached the orbit of Mars, then the asteroid belt, then Jupiter. Each step cost them hundreds of ships, but they kept coming. Zython was willing to sacrifice everything to reach Earth. On the 5th day, the Velthari broke through the main defense line. 3,000 of their ships headed straight for Earth. The planet's orbital defenses opened fire, but they were not enough to stop such a massive force. Admiral Griffin made a decision that would be remembered forever. He ordered the remaining human ships to pursue the Velthari into Earth orbit. The battle would be fought above humanity's home, with billions of lives hanging in the balance. The fighting above Earth lasted for 6 more days. Ships fell from the sky like burning meteors. Cities were evacuated as debris rained down. The world watched as their defenders gave everything they had. On the 11th day, only 500 Velthari ships remained. But the human fleet had been reduced to less than 1,000 vessels. Both sides were exhausted, bleeding, dying. Captain Harper led a boarding party onto the Eternal Dominion. Human Marines fought through corridors filled with Velthari soldiers. They lost many good people in that assault, but they did not stop. They could not stop, not when they were so close. Harper reached the command center and found High Commander Zython waiting for him. The Velthari leader was wounded, his scales cracked and bleeding, but his eyes still burned with hatred. Zython offered Harper a deal. He said they could end this war together. He said that if Harper surrendered now, he would spare Earth. He promised that humanity would be treated as a respected subject species, not slaves. Harper looked at the alien who had caused so much suffering. He thought about his crew members who had died on the Starward Hope. He thought about the prisoners who had suffered on the station. He thought about all the species who had lived in chains because of this creature and his kind. He said no. Zython attacked with all his remaining strength. The fight was brief, but violent. When it ended, High Commander Zython lay dead on the floor of his own command center. The war was over. The remaining Velthari ships surrendered. The species that had ruled through fear for 3,000 years had been broken by a race that had been traveling among the stars for less than 20 years. Counselor Thren came to Earth in person to negotiate the peace. He met Secretary of Defense Laura Patterson in a city that had been partially destroyed by falling debris during the battle. Ruins surrounded them as they talked. Thren apologized for the Council's failure to act. He asked what terms humanity would accept for lasting peace and cooperation. Patterson looked at the destruction around them. She thought about the cost humanity had paid for survival. Then she spoke. She said that humanity accepted the apology. They would join the galactic community. They would help build a better future. But she wanted the Council to understand something important. Humanity did not win because they were stronger or smarter than the Velthari. They won because when everything seemed hopeless, they refused to surrender. They won because they fought not just for themselves, but for every species that the Council had abandoned to slavery. She told Thren that if the Council ever stood by and watched innocent beings suffer again, humanity would remember. And next time, they would not wait to be attacked before they acted. Thren bowed his head and accepted her words. In the years that followed, humanity took its place among the stars, not as conquerors, but as guardians. The species they had freed became loyal allies. The Galactic Council reformed its ways under human influence. And across the galaxy, a new saying spread from world to world. It was a warning that every species learned to respect. Do not provoke the humans. They do not know how to surrender. And they never forget. The Galactic Council begged for peace, but it was too late. Part 1. First Contact Gone Wrong. The year was 2247. Humanity had finally done what they dreamed of for centuries. They built a ship that could travel faster than light. The vessel was called the Starward Hope, and it carried 60 brave men and women into the unknown darkness of space. Captain Daniel Harper stood on the bridge and watched the stars blur past the windows. He was a tall man with gray hair and kind eyes. He had spent 30 years in the space program waiting for this moment. Now he was leading humanity's first journey beyond their own solar system. Lieutenant Commander Lisa Morgan sat at her station beside him. She was younger, with sharp eyes and quick hands on the controls. She had been chosen for this mission because she was the best pilot Earth had ever produced. Behind them, Chief Engineer Kevin Drake monitored the ship's systems. He was a quiet man who loved machines more than people. The engine that powered their ship was his design, and he treated it like his own child. At the communications station, Amy Lawson listened to the silence of space. She was waiting to hear something, anything, that would tell them they were not alone in the universe. They had been traveling for 3 weeks when they entered the Andromeda sector. This region of space was completely unknown to humanity. Star maps showed nothing but empty void. But the void was not empty. Amy suddenly sat up straight in her chair. Her screens were filled with signals she had never seen before. Hundreds of them. Thousands of them. Captain Harper walked over to her station. He looked at the readings and felt his heart begin to race. These were not natural signals. These were communications. Someone was out there. Before he could give any orders, the ship shook violently. Lisa grabbed her controls and tried to stabilize them. Through the windows, they saw something that took their breath away. Ships. Massive ships. Hundreds of them surrounded the Starward Hope like wolves around a wounded deer. Each vessel was larger than anything humanity had ever built. Their hulls were dark green and covered with strange symbols. Weapons pointed at the small human ship from every direction. A face appeared on their main screen. It was not human. The creature had scales, like a lizard, and eyes that burned with cold intelligence. Its teeth were sharp and yellow. When it spoke, its voice was filled with contempt. The creature called itself High Commander Zython of the Velthari Dominion. It said that humans had entered space that did not belong to them. It said that the Velthari had ruled this region for 3,000 years. It said that humans were primitive insects who should have stayed on their tiny world. He said they came in peace. He said they were explorers, not soldiers. He said they meant no harm and only wanted to learn about other species in the galaxy. Zython laughed. It was an ugly sound that made the crew feel cold inside. He said that he did not care about human peace. He said that the Velthari did not negotiate with lesser species. Then he gave an order to his fleet. The first blast hit the starboard Hope on its left side. The ship screamed as metal tore apart. Crew members were thrown against walls. Fires broke out in 3 sections. Kevin Drake ran through the smoke, trying to save his engine from complete destruction. Lisa fought with the controls, but it was hopeless. More blasts struck the ship. Systems failed one after another. The lights went dark, and emergency power kicked in, bathing everything in red. Captain Harper grabbed the communication system, with blood running down his face from a wound on his forehead. He sent a message back to Earth. He told them everything. He described the aliens, their ships, their weapons. He told Earth that they were not alone in the universe, and that the universe was not friendly. The final blast crippled the engine completely. The starward Hope drifted dead in space. Velthari soldiers boarded the vessel and dragged the surviving crew members out at gunpoint. 37 of the 60 crew members had died in the attack. Zython looked at Captain Harper with disgust. He said that humans would learn their place. He said that Earth had 1 standard galactic year to surrender completely to the Velthari Dominion. If they refused, every human would be killed or enslaved. To make his point clear, Zython ordered his soldiers to beat the prisoners. Captain Harper, Lisa, Kevin, and Amy were forced to their knees before cameras. Zython broadcast the scene to Earth, so all humans could see what happened to those who dared to reach for the stars. On Earth, Admiral Chris Bennett sat in the command center of the Terran Defense Coalition. He was an old soldier who had seen many terrible things in his life, but nothing had prepared him for what he saw on that screen. He watched Captain Harper, a man he had known for 20 years, being beaten by alien soldiers. He watched young Amy Lawson crying as she was dragged away in chains. He listened to Zython's demands and threats. When the transmission ended, the room was silent. Every officer, every politician, every scientist who had gathered there was frozen in shock. Humanity had dreamed of meeting alien life for centuries. They had imagined friendship, trade, shared knowledge. They had never imagined this. Admiral Bennett stood up slowly. His hands were shaking, but his voice was steady. He said that they had 1 year. He said that the aliens thought humans would be afraid. He said that the aliens did not understand what they had just done. The Terran Defense Coalition held an emergency meeting that lasted 3 days. Every nation on Earth sent representatives. Old enemies sat together and agreed to set aside their differences. The threat they faced was greater than any war they had ever fought among themselves. When the meeting ended, a decision had been made. Humanity would not surrender. Humanity would not kneel. Instead, they would do what they had always done when faced with impossible odds. They would fight. Factories that had been closed for years were opened again. Engineers began designing new ships based on what little data the Starward Hope had sent before being captured. Scientists studied the alien weapon signatures and searched for weaknesses. Young men and women across the planet looked up at the stars with new eyes. Those stars were no longer places of wonder and mystery. They were the home of an enemy that had hurt their people, and humanity was going to make them pay. The sleeping giant had been awakened. The Velthari did not know it yet, but they had made a terrible mistake.